As we do on a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby. Wendy Francis is National Director of Politics at the ACL. Wendy's back with us. Wendy, welcome back to 2020.
Thank you so much, Neil. As always, we really appreciate the opportunity to catch up with you.
Wendy, as usual, there is a full agenda, and keeping us up to date on some of those things that are going on, empowering us to take some action too, that's an important element. Let's start with the Northern Territory and ACT push for euthanasia. Have you got some insight into where things are up to?
Yeah, so what's happening is that Luke Gosling, who is one of the members of parliament in the Northern Territory, he's situated up in Darwin, he's introduced the intention to bring forward a bill that would overturn Kevin Andrews' bill. Now, it's a little bit long-winded to say that, but what the bill, Kevin Andrews' bill, was that the territories did not have the ability to introduce euthanasia into the territories. And, you know, as we know, the territories are still under oversight of the Australian government, the federal government, and that goes hand in hand with the responsibility to advocate for the best interests of all Territorians, because the Commonwealth government is still have the oversight. So this doesn't just apply to financial liabilities, but it's also about some of these important issues. So Luke Gosling is saying, look, this is all about just giving the rights back to the territories. But the only right that the Kevin Andrews bill actually affects is the right to introduce euthanasia. So this is all about euthanasia in the territories. Our understanding is that it'll go straight through the lower house, and so our concentration is actually going to be in the Senate, where in the past, when this legislation has been brought forward, there have been at least 4 ALP senators who have voted against this. So we're hopeful that they will still vote. 3 of those 4 are still in the Senate. And so we're hopeful of that, because this is at a time when the Northern Territory particularly are experiencing, I would say, distressingly high rates of domestic violence, particularly in Indigenous communities. And euthanasia is one of those issues that Indigenous Australians actually do not want to go there. Their suicide rates are more than twice as high as non-Indigenous Australians, and so historically, Indigenous people have really grave concerns about what people are calling voluntary assisted dying, and it's assisted suicide or euthanasia, all these words, because they find it frightening, and it's actually at odds with their culture. And so what we're saying to the Commonwealth Government is, you want to listen to First Nations people, you're saying that you do, and we agree, we want to listen to First Nations people. Well, listen to their voices on this, because they are saying, why would they even go into Darwin for help, medical help, if they know the doctors can kill them? Now, that is definitely not the intention of the doctors in Darwin, but the fear is there for Indigenous people is, why would you give a doctor the right to be able to actually bring about somebody's death? So this is a big issue. It will come up very soon. Our understanding is it'll be probably in the first sitting of Parliament. So this is something that they just want to get through.
So there's a challenging thing here. You're saying to the federal parliament, check the pulse of what will happen in Indigenous communities if this sort of legislation is allowed to go through. That's very, very challenging. And for people in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, they'll know better than anyone how the reaction would be if they were able to pursue those sorts of voluntary assisted dying laws. So the federal parliament, it's likely to go through the lower house. You're focusing your attention on the upper house, where there is possibility to stop this, but that'll be challenging too. Likelihood, Wendy, that MPs will have a conscience vote on this on all sides. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage, do you think?
Well, we always want people to have the free will to make a decision on these important issues, but we also like parties to actually make a stand on things that their communities, the people who voted them in, want to see happen. So I spoke to Jacinta Price over the weekend, Senator Jacinta Price, and she's going to be a good, strong voice on this. But there are, as I say, some people in the Labor Party. But our concern is that in the coalition there will be people who agree with this, because they want to be the ones who say, of course we want to give rights back to the territories. But this is not all about rights back to the territories. Indigenous communities, they actually believe euthanasia is abhorrent. They're frightened by it. It is certainly at odds with the way they deal with dying culturally. But they are the ones who will not be the ones who are involved in campaigns in the Northern Territory against euthanasia, because it's often white voices that we hear, not necessarily the people of the communities. And so, for me, this is actually a white preoccupation that will cause hurt to Indigenous Australians. And we're hoping to stop it before it gets to the discussion around euthanasia, because even that will be distressing. But it could end up just being straight to the territories to discuss euthanasia legislation. And we are hoping to invite and to hear from Indigenous voices in that discussion.
And a little insight into what's to come, because the Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, is considering changing the law to allow doctors to give phone and telehealth advice to patients about voluntary assisted dying after pressure from the Queensland government. That sort of indicates what's coming, Wendy.
Exactly, because at the moment there are laws against discussing suicide over the phone for obvious reasons. You can't even be there to stop that person jumping off the bridge. So, this is about suicide. So that has been a sort of a hard thing with euthanasia, because what it has meant that you can't actually discuss euthanasia over the phone because it is suicide. I mean, that it's so illogical to say that euthanasia isn't suicide when the law actually prevents it. So it's a very big concern that Mark Dreyfus is considering changing this law, because how do you really ascertain somebody's psychological sort of position that they're in? How do you really ascertain where they are and what their needs are before you give a green tick for them to actually be bumped off? It's actually really distressing, yeah.
This seemed to go under the radar, didn't it, when these laws were being passed in the state of Queensland? And as you really beautifully illustrate that there, someone's about to jump off a bridge. The typical thing might be for us, if we're nearby, to go and extend a loving, helping hand to someone. But in that case, someone's jumping off a bridge or jumping off the ledge on a high-rise building, you'd be breaking the law to help them. That's crazy, isn't it?
It is crazy, because when we're talking about people who want to end their life, then we want to find out what are the problems, how can we fix them? And so, there are so many gaps in our family networks these days that this is where churches are so incredibly helpful, because they often step in when there's gaps in family networks. And for many people who want to take their own lives, a big part of that is not wanting to be a burden on society. And so how terrible is it that we would get to the stage where we would agree that somebody is a burden and allow them to take their own lives for that reason? It's a very bad look, isn't it, for our society when we are talking about allowing people to take their own lives because of a perceived burden on society.
And I imagine you've just got to keep talking about this with MPs, with senators, with people who are in your local community and who are legislators at a state or territory level, as well as those at a federal level. Hey, there's other big things that are happening. Let's touch on those developments that are going on in Tasmania, Wendy. Oppressive laws that are proposed there. Law even extends to the sorts of conversations that you might have around the family. Around your kitchen table, it's a little bit intrusive, don't you think, when governments propose to legislate how you can talk to your own children?
Incredibly intrusive. And, one of the human rights that we have is to be able to raise our children in our beliefs. And so this would have even far-reaching restrictions on your biblical beliefs and your private conversations with your children. Because if a child then goes to school and says, no, my mum says you can't change gender, then that can actually be investigated, and the child could be taken from those parents and the parents could actually be put in jail.
And you've got this crazy situation where doctors and counsellors would need to abandon their medical and clinical training to fit in with a new ideological agenda. Somehow or other, you've got to look for solutions, haven't you?
Correct. And one of the problems with that is that the doctors and counsellors who are wanting to do the very best for children are actually absenting themselves now from these conversations because they don't want to affirm a child in transitioning, but neither do they want to end up being in jail themselves. So they're just getting out of it. So what we're finding is that the counsellors and medical practitioners that are left are the ones that are happy to affirm a child's misunderstanding of who they actually are. And so a child in a kindergarten wanting to be a boy rather than a girl can very quickly find themselves on a conveyor belt of transitioning and be regretful away to not even very far in the future, but already the damage has been done. And this is a diabolical thing that we're doing to our children. And I really do believe that this is a form of child abuse.
We're reminded that kids and teenagers can't reverse the physical effects of the surgical procedures that they are opting for. There is some action that listeners can take today, Wendy. There's a petition, a parliamentary petition. How can listeners access that and have their name at least added to a petition list?
So you can just go to the Tasmanian Parliamentary website and find it there, but we do have a link on our website as well, so acl.org.au, and we also have a write-in campaign on the ACL website. So it's the more voices, but also the more signatures that we get on that, the better. There is a petition also calling for this to happen, and it's much higher than ours at the moment. So we really encourage, and when I say ours, it's actually not an ACL. The parliamentary petition is not an ACL petition. It was a concerned person who we have really joined with to push back on this. So yeah, there's a parliamentary petition and also a writing campaign. Both links will be found on your ACL website.
Now, Wendy, the next state election is on the horizon, the Victorian state election, and ACL is calling Christians to be in prayer at this time, just a few months away. What are your thoughts here around calling for the nation to be praying for the state of Victoria?
Victoria is a dark place in many different ways, and what we've seen over the last two terms of government is that not only has the Andrews government shifted Victoria right away from conservative values through everything that they've been bringing in, but that has affected our entire nation. And so much of what has been brought into Victoria has then been brought in other states. And so the concern for us is that not only is Daniel Andrews' government so incredibly anti-Christian, that what we're seeing is that the opposition is not standing up for conservative or their base values, because they're also sort of trying to pander to minority groups that I would have to say logically it doesn't even make sense to me, honestly, Neil, because the minority groups that they're trying to appeal to will never vote for the conservative parties. So, but their very base they seem to be abandoning, and so we're just calling people to really pray. We will be running a strong campaign in Victoria. We're not sure how to do that yet. There are some excellent candidates, and so we will be supporting them. But a lot of what we've seen as gender theory and identity politics, a lot of that has come out of Victoria. And, hostility towards Christian faith is on the rise there. We are asking Christians across the nation, not just Victorians, but across the nation to pray for Victoria and specifically for this upcoming election in November.
I know there'll be listeners who'll be very heartened to hear the Australian Christian Lobby calling for prayer from Christian believers right around the nation, because being on our knees in the courts of the Lord is not a weakness. That's actually a real strength, calling on God to intervene in circumstances that are taking our nation, as you say, even towards hostility towards Christian faith. It's on the rise, and it's demonstrated in what's been going on in Victoria over these past two terms. Hey, Wendy, the Babylon miniseries has been announced. Give us some thoughts here. It's The Truth of It Live. What is Babylon all about?
So Martin has been doing a lot of research on this, and he's got a mini-series happening. So it's Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne, and they're all different topics: Babylon Rising, Babylon Reigning and Babylon Falling. And it's through September, October, November. There is a trailer on our ACL website for people to understand more about what he's saying, but he's really wanting to call Australians back to an understanding of God and to an understanding of how far we have actually fallen. So we already have a reserve list because we do expect this to sell out. Thousands of people came to our last Truth of It Live events, and they were not in Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne. So this time it's Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, and they're pretty dark places, to be honest, but we'll be shedding some light there.
And Martin Isles, an outstanding communicator, as so many of our listeners will recognise. And to be a part of this Babylon mini-series, let me give the dates in Sydney: Babylon Rising, Saturday the 24th of September. In Canberra, Babylon Reigning, Saturday the 29th of October. And in Melbourne, Babylon Falling, Friday the 11th of November. Huge events. And no doubt, as has been the case in the past, where you've got venues booked and you've got such sellouts, you have to go and book a bigger venue. No doubt that'll be happening again today too. So for listeners to be a part of those events, there is a reserve list. As Wendy says, you can get first dibs on the tickets. Those tickets being released next month in August. You can go to the ACL website at acl.org.au. There's a trailer there. And don't miss what's happening with the Babylon mini-series coming to your community, especially for those listeners in Sydney, or those who are around Canberra, or those who are in Melbourne. Wendy Francis, always outstanding insights. You've got a lot on your plate as things begin to heat up later this year as we move towards that Victorian state election. Undoubtedly, we'll have lots of good commentary from you as that time comes. But Wendy, thank you so much for joining us once again today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. God bless you.